The clash of swords echoes across the sun-baked hills of the Holy Land. Armored knights from Europe meet Saracen warriors in a conflict that would span centuries. But behind the public battles and grand campaigns, a different kind of war was being waged in the shadows. The immense chaos of the Crusades created vast power vacuums, a perfect breeding ground for clandestine organizations to rise. What hidden forces were truly shaping the course of history from the shadows? By the end of this story, you will understand how secret orders of bankers, healers, and assassins wielded more influence than kings. We will uncover the truth behind the Templars' vanished fleet and explore the mountain fortress where a single word could command a man to die. What do you believe is the most powerful weapon a secret society can possess? Europe was a continent straining at its own seams. For centuries, its kingdoms had turned inward, their horizons limited by local feuds and the next harvest. Then, in the late 11th century, a call echoed from the east, a plea from the Byzantine emperor for military aid against powerful Seljuk Turk forces. When Pope Urban II amplified this call, he ignited a firestorm of religious fervor. The chance to reclaim Jerusalem, to earn spiritual redemption through a holy pilgrimage of arms, sent tens of thousands marching toward an unknown world. This was not a single organized army, but a chaotic migration of faith, a river of humanity flowing across continents. But faith alone cannot move an army. The sheer logistics were staggering. How do you feed and water 50,000 men and their horses in a foreign desert? How do you navigate lands where you do not speak the language or understand the customs? The Crusaders, for all their zeal, were outsiders stumbling into a region of ancient and sophisticated civilizations. They encountered the Byzantine Empire, a Christian realm but one with a vastly different culture and a deep suspicion of these rough Latin knights from the west. They clashed and occasionally cooperated with a mosaic of Islamic powers, from the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt to various Seljuk successor states, each with its own complex political agenda. In this tangled web of alliances and betrayals, where no one could be fully trusted, public knowledge became a liability. Specialized, secret knowledge became the ultimate currency. Understanding hidden trade routes, possessing maps to secret water sources, or having agents who could decipher the shifting loyalties of local emirs, these were the tools that determined survival. The public war was fought with sword and shield, but the true battle for influence was waged in whispers, in coded messages, and in the shadows of forgotten temples. So what exactly separated these shadowy organizations from the knights and monks everyone could see? A secret order was not merely a group that kept some of its activities quiet. It was an entity built from the ground up on the principle of concealment, wielding influence far beyond its public face. First, consider their hidden hierarchies. While a king's court or a bishop's diocese had a clear public structure, a true secret order operated with an inner circle directing an outer shell. An ordinary soldier or a local merchant supporting the group might only ever know his immediate superior, completely unaware of the grandmaster pulling the strings from a distant chapter house. This cellular structure protected the leadership and made the entire organization incredibly resilient. If one cell was discovered, the others could continue their work undisturbed. Then there was the power of esoteric knowledge. These groups did not trade in common skills like swordsmanship. They trafficked in secrets. This could be advanced architectural techniques unknown in Europe, allowing them to build vaults that were considered impenetrable. It could be medicinal knowledge gleaned from Arabic texts, giving them healing abilities that seemed miraculous. Or it might be complex financial systems, creating a primitive form of banking that allowed a pilgrim to deposit money in Paris and withdraw it in Jerusalem. This specialized knowledge made them indispensable, granting them access and influence that rivaled crowns. But perhaps the most defining feature was their secret rituals. These were not simple oaths of loyalty. They were elaborate ceremonies of initiation designed to bind members together with an unbreakable spiritual and psychological bond. Through symbolic gestures, coded passwords, and sacred vows, a new member was transformed. He was no longer just a French knight or an Italian merchant. He was now part of a chosen fraternity with a new identity that superseded even his loyalty to king or country. This created a parallel society with its own laws and its own justice, operating entirely outside the official channels of power. Their political agendas were never publicly declared. A king would proclaim his war aims from the steps of his palace. A secret order pursued its goals through backroom deals, covert alliances, and strategic assassinations, its true intentions known only to its highest-ranking members. They were ghosts in the machine of history, their hands on levers that no one else could even see. From a vow of poverty to unimaginable wealth, the story of the Knights Templar is one of history's most dramatic transformations. It began with 9 French knights led by a man named Hugues de Payens, who presented themselves to the King of Jerusalem around the year 1119. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and King Solomon's Temple, taking their name from the headquarters granted to them on the Temple Mount. Their stated mission was sacred and simple: to protect the streams of Christian pilgrims traveling from the coast to the Holy City. These roads were notoriously dangerous, plagued by bandits who saw the vulnerable travelers as easy prey. The original Templars were so poor that their official seal famously depicted 2 knights sharing a single horse, a powerful symbol of their humble beginnings and their deep brotherly bond. But this image of poverty would not last. Their unique position as monk warriors, answering directly to the Pope, gave them a special status. They were not subject to the laws of any local king or bishop. Donations of land and money began to pour in from noble families across Europe, eager to support the holy cause. Soon, they were not just protecting pilgrims, they were facilitating their entire journey. This is where their genius truly emerged. A pilgrim from England or France faced a terrible dilemma. To fund a journey that could take years, he would have to carry his entire wealth in coin, making him a walking target for thieves. The Templars offered a revolutionary solution. A man could deposit his fortune at a local Templar preceptory in London. In return, he received a letter of credit, a coded document that was worthless to anyone but the Templars themselves. He could then travel unburdened and, upon reaching Jerusalem, present his letter at the local temple to reclaim the equivalent value from the order's treasury. It was the birth of international banking, protected by the most trusted brand in the medieval world. The Templars did not just move money, they created a network of fortified houses that functioned as the first ATMs. They began lending vast sums, not just to pilgrims, but to kings and popes, financing wars and entire kingdoms. Their financial power became their true secret, far surpassing their military might. They were the bankers in armor, and their vaults held more influence than any castle. How did this immense financial power, which built a shadow empire across continents, ultimately become their greatest vulnerability? Their financial network became the invisible scaffolding for the entire Crusader enterprise, but their power was not confined to the counting house. On the battlefield, the Templars forged a reputation as the most disciplined and fearsome fighting force of their age. While other knights might break ranks in pursuit of personal glory, the Templars fought as one unbreakable machine. Their rule demanded absolute obedience, and their battle tactics were revolutionary. They became the elite shock troops of the Holy Land, a hammer to be deployed at the most critical point of a battle. At the Battle of Montjuic in 1177, a legendary example of their impact, a young King Baldwin IV, suffering from leprosy, led a vastly outnumbered Christian army against the forces of Saladin. The key to their victory was the ferocious charge of the Templar Knights, a disciplined, unstoppable wedge of steel and faith that shattered Saladin's center and sent his army into a rout. Their very presence on a battlefield could change its outcome, not just through strength, but through the psychological terror they inspired in their foes. Yet their military and financial power were two sides of the same coin, a self-reinforcing cycle of influence. The wealth flowing through their treasuries funded their military orders, paying for the finest war horses, the best armor, and the construction of impregnable castles like the mighty Atlet, a coastal fortress so advanced it was never taken by force. And their battlefield successes, in turn, convinced more nobles and merchants to trust them with their fortunes, further swelling their coffers. They became a state within a state, a multinational corporation with its own army, answerable to no earthly power. This total independence, however, would plant the seeds of their eventual downfall. For when you become the banker to kings, you also become their greatest creditor, and a king in debt is a king who sees a rival, not an ally. How does an organization with so much power, so deeply woven into the fabric of empires, simply vanish from the world? The answer lies not in a battlefield defeat, but in a single, chilling Friday morning. A king's greed could shatter their land-based empire, but their true escape route may have been waiting at sea. While history remembers the Templars as knights and bankers, they commanded something far more elusive, a fleet of ships that vanished from official records. This maritime arm was the lifeblood of their financial network, a constant flow of vessels moving treasure, troops, and trade goods between Europe and the Holy Land. Their main European port was La Rochelle, a bustling hub on the Atlantic coast of France. From here, their distinctive white-masted ships set sail, carrying silver from English mines, timber from Scandinavian forests, and newly initiated brothers to the front lines. They did not just transport goods, they controlled the most valuable commodity of all, information. A Templar ship was a floating fortress, its captain privy to the tides, politics, and secret pathways of the Mediterranean and beyond. This mastery of the sea gave birth to enduring legends. When the order was violently suppressed in the early 14th century, King Philip IV of France seized their vast continental properties, but their treasury, the legendary wealth accumulated over 2 centuries, was nowhere to be found. The official records showed only a modest amount of coin. So where did it all go? The most compelling theory points to their fleet. In the days and weeks before the mass arrests on Friday, October 13, 1307, multiple ships slipped out of La Rochelle, their holds allegedly filled with the order's accumulated treasure and its most sacred relics. These vessels simply disappeared from history, fueling speculation that they sailed to uncharted waters. Some tales suggest they reached Scotland, bolstering Robert the Bruce's fight for independence. Others whisper of a journey across the Atlantic long before Columbus, using sea charts copied from ancient libraries in the East, maps that showed lands unknown to European cartographers. Did the Templars possess navigational secrets that allowed them to cross oceans? Their extensive contact with Arab scholars, who themselves had preserved and expanded upon the geographic knowledge of the Greeks and Romans, makes it entirely plausible. The loss of their fleet was the loss of their greatest mystery, a question that still ripples through history. What if their most powerful legacy was not what they left behind, but what they successfully hid? While the Templars perfected the art of finance, another order mastered the science of survival, blending mercy with military might in a way no other group dared. In the heart of Jerusalem, just a short walk from the Temple Mount, lay the monastery of St. John the Baptist. Here, around the year 1070, a group of Benedictine monks from the Italian merchant republic of Amalfi established a hospice dedicated to St. John the Eleemosynary. Their mission was profoundly simple: to offer refuge and medical care to the countless sick, injured, and impoverished pilgrims who had survived the arduous journey to the Holy City. They were the Hospitallers, and their symbol, the 8-pointed white cross, represented the 8 Beatitudes and a vow of service. While knights fought for territory, these brothers fought fever, infection, and exhaustion, saving lives in a city soaked in bloodshed. Their medical knowledge, drawn from both European and advanced Arabic texts, made their infirmary the most advanced hospital in the region. They understood principles of sanitation, wound care, and even rudimentary psychology that were centuries ahead of their time. A pilgrim would not just receive a poultice and a prayer, but a bed, clean linens, and a diet tailored to their ailment. This compassion built them a foundation of goodwill no army could ever conquer. Yet the brutal reality of the Crusades forced a dramatic evolution. How could they protect the pilgrims traveling to their hospital doors? This question transformed them from healers into a unique hybrid, a military order sworn to defend the faith with the sword, while never abandoning their original oath to heal the sick. They became the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. Their dual identity was their greatest strength. A wounded soldier knew he would be cared for by the same brother who might have fought beside him in the morning. Their network of fortresses, however, was the true secret to their enduring power. They built and garrisoned some of the most formidable castles in the Holy Land, like the magnificent Crac des Chevaliers. These were not just military strongholds, they were self-sufficient communities, administrative centers, and hospitals. They controlled key trade and pilgrimage routes, and their command of these strategic points gave them immense political leverage. Their power base was not a single treasure vault, but a sprawling, interconnected web of stone and science, of care and control. They wielded a different kind of secret power, one built on resilience and an unwavering purpose that would ultimately allow them to outlast every other Crusader state. The fall of Acre in 1291 signaled the end of the Christian kingdom in the Holy Land, but it was not the end of the Order of St. John. While other institutions crumbled, the Hospitallers did the unthinkable. They packed their relics, their medical texts, and their entire brotherhood onto ships and sailed away. They were exiles, yet they remained a sovereign power without a kingdom, a nation embodied by its people and its purpose. Their first sanctuary was the Byzantine island of Rhodes, which they conquered through sheer force of will. Here, they transformed themselves from a land-based garrison into a naval power, recognizing that the sea was now their new frontier. They built a formidable fleet of war galleys to patrol the eastern Mediterranean, becoming the primary shield of Christian Europe against the expanding Ottoman Empire. For 2 centuries, they ruled Rhodes as an independent state, minting their own coins, enacting their own laws, and conducting international diplomacy. Their identity seamlessly evolved, blending their knightly vows with the life of a mariner. A Hospitaller knight was now as likely to command a galley in a sea battle as he was to tend to a wounded comrade. This incredible adaptability was the core of their secret power. They were not defined by a single piece of land, but by their unbroken mission to defend and to heal. Even when a vast Ottoman army finally expelled them from Rhodes in 1522, they departed with full military honors, a testament to the respect they commanded from their greatest enemies. So where does a nation of knights go when it has no home? The answer came from Emperor Charles V of Spain, who offered them the barren, strategic rock of Malta. It was a test of their resolve. The island was windswept, poorly defended, and directly in the path of Ottoman naval ambition. Yet the Hospitallers saw not a desolate outpost, but a fortress. They fortified its harbors, built a new capital city, Valletta, and waited for the inevitable confrontation. In 1565 it came. A colossal Ottoman armada, one of the largest ever assembled, descended upon Malta, intending to wipe the order from the map. The Great Siege of Malta was a slaughterhouse. The knights and the Maltese people, fighting side by side, endured a hellish bombardment and countless assaults. The aged Grandmaster, Jean Parisot de la Valette, himself wounded, directed the defense from the front lines. The Hospitallers' medical expertise was pushed to its limits as their infirmaries overflowed with the mangled and the dying. After nearly 4 months of unimaginable carnage, the Ottosaurs withdrew, broken. The order had not only survived, it had secured its legend. From the ashes of the Crusades, they had reinvented themselves again and again, proving that the most powerful weapon was not a castle wall but an unbreakable purpose. How could an order born in the hospitals of Jerusalem outlast empires and shape the destiny of the Mediterranean for centuries? While the Hospitallers forged a new destiny on the Mediterranean waves, a different kind of crusade was unfolding under the cold, grey skies of the north. The Teutonic Order began not in the deserts of Palestine, but in the desperate siege of Acre during the Third Crusade. A group of German merchants from Bremen and Lübeck established a field hospital, using their sails and tents to care for the wounded. Their compassion earned them formal recognition as a military order, and they adopted the distinctive black cross on a white mantle. For a time, they fought alongside the Templars and Hospitallers in the Holy Land, but they soon discovered their true calling lay elsewhere, in a vast pagan wilderness that promised both salvation and sovereign power. The Baltic region was a world apart, a sprawling landscape of dense forests, frozen marshes, and ancient tribes who worshipped old gods. For the kingdoms of Christendom, these lands were a void on the map, a place of mystery and menace. The Teutonic Knights were invited to tame this frontier, to convert the native Prussians, Lithuanians, and Livonians by any means necessary. This invitation was their opportunity, and they seized it with an ambition that would eclipse their original purpose. They did not just join a war, they declared a perpetual crusade, one that would last for centuries and be fought not for a distant holy city, but for a kingdom of their own. Their methods were systematic and brutal, a chilling fusion of religious zeal and military pragmatism. They built a network of brick castles, stark and formidable, that advanced slowly into the wilderness like stepping stones of conquest. From these fortresses, they launched seasonal campaigns known as racen into pagan territory, burning villages, seizing land, and systematically dismantling the old ways. Their ultimate weapon, however, was not the sword but the settler. To secure their gains, they encouraged thousands of German peasants and townsfolk to colonize the conquered lands, offering them land and freedom in exchange for transforming the wilderness into a recognizable Christian state. This was not a temporary military campaign. It was a project of cultural and political replacement, orchestrated with cold efficiency. The order itself became the government, the church, and the army all in one. They answered only to the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, but on the ground they were the law. Their Grand Master ruled from the immense fortress of Marienburg, a castle complex so vast it was a capital city in its own right, a physical manifestation of their sovereign power. They created a state out of nothing, a theocratic machine fueled by faith, fear, and an unwavering will to expand. How did a brotherhood founded to tend the sick become one of the most formidable state-building forces of the Middle Ages, and what hidden costs were buried beneath the stones of their magnificent castles? Their state was a machine, and every person within it was a cog designed for a specific purpose. At the very top stood the Brother Knights, the military and administrative elite who had taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They were the masters of the brick castles that dotted the landscape, the commanders of armies, and the ultimate arbiters of law. Yet beneath this warrior monk caste was a second, equally crucial layer, the priest brethren who managed the spiritual life, and just as importantly, the vast bureaucracy required to run a sovereign state. They kept the records, collected the taxes, and penned the diplomatic letters that kept the outside world at bay. The third pillar was the half-brothers or sergeants, men of common birth who served as men-at-arms or craftsmen, forming the backbone of the order's military and economic might. But the machine was powered by the people it had conquered and invited. Native Prussians and Livonians were often relegated to a subservient status, their old ways systematically erased, while thousands of German settlers, the real engine of colonization, were granted land and privileges to farm the new territory and populate its newly built towns. This rigid, caste-based society was engineered for one purpose: perpetual expansion and control. Their economic power was the lifeblood of this machine, and they seized it by dominating the Baltic trade. The order did not just tax the merchants who traveled their rivers and roads, they became the merchants. They controlled the production and shipment of the region's most valuable commodities, amber, a golden treasure prized across Europe, and grain, the staple that fed growing cities. Their network of castles doubled as customs houses and warehouses, ensuring that every piece of wealth flowing through their territory passed through their hands. They minted their own coins, creating a sovereign currency that cemented their economic independence. This immense wealth funded their endless crusade, building more castles, hiring more mercenaries, and securing more alliances. But how did a monastic order, theoretically subordinate to Pope and Emperor, maintain its political independence while sitting between such powerful neighbors? The answer lay in a masterful game of secret diplomacy. The Teutonic Order became masters of playing Poland, Lithuania, and the various principalities of the Holy Roman Empire against one another. They would offer their formidable army as allies to one kingdom, while secretly negotiating a truce with its rival. They used spies and informants to stay ahead of political shifts, and their diplomatic correspondence was a web of half-truths and strategic omissions. They presented themselves to the Pope as the steadfast defenders of Christendom on its northern frontier, while simultaneously engaging in realpolitik that often had little to do with faith. This delicate balancing act allowed them to act as a sovereign power for centuries, a secret state hidden in plain sight, its true authority woven from economic monopoly, social engineering, and whispered promises in royal courts far away. What happens when such a perfectly engineered machine finally meets a force it cannot manipulate or conquer? While the Teutonic Knights built their state on a northern frontier, another order held the very heart of the Crusader world in its hands. Within the ancient walls of Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stood as the spiritual center of the Christian kingdom, a monument built over the sites of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. Guarding this most sacred ground was the duty of the canons regular of the Holy Sepulchre. They were not warrior monks in the same mold as the Templars, but a unique brotherhood of ordained priests and lay knights united by a single, profound mission. Their power was not measured in castles or coins, but in the immense symbolic authority they commanded. To be a guardian of the sepulchre was to be a custodian of Christianity's foundational story, a living link to the events that had launched the entire crusading movement. Their presence transformed the chaotic energy of a military conquest into the solemn order of a divine kingdom. They were the stage managers of the sacred, controlling access to the tomb itself and overseeing the intricate rituals that gave the Crusader state its spiritual legitimacy. The secrets they protected were not just military or financial, but deeply archaeological and historical. They were the gatekeepers of the church's physical structure, a building that had been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times over the centuries. They possessed the oral traditions and ancient documents that detailed the site's complex history, knowledge of which exact rock was Golgotha and which chamber was the true tomb. This intimate understanding of the holy geography made them indispensable. When a new Crusader king was crowned, the ceremony did not take place in a secular palace. It happened within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the canons of the Holy Sepulchre were the officiants. They anointed the monarch, placing the crown upon his head in the very place where Christ was said to have worn a crown of thorns. This act fused political power with divine sanction, and the order stood at the center of it all. Their role made them the ultimate arbiters of spiritual authority in the kingdom, a quiet, constant force ensuring that the state's existence was always framed as a divine mandate. How does an order dedicated to ceremony and guardianship exert a form of influence that can quietly shape the destiny of kings? A different kind of warrior took a vow within the Crusader states, one that separated him from the world even more completely than the monastic rules of the Templars. While other orders built their power on wealth or healing, the Knights of St. Lazarus built theirs on a shared affliction. They were the leper knights, men already living in the shadow of death who chose to serve until its very end. Their story begins not on a battlefield but in a hospice just outside the walls of Jerusalem, a refuge dedicated to Saint Lazarus, the patron saint of lepers. Here, knights from every other order who had contracted leprosy were sent to live out their days, but these men were not content to simply wait for death. They formed a new brotherhood, a unique military order composed entirely of knights who were lepers, led by commanders who shared their condition. The reality of their illness was starkly different from the terrifying myths that surrounded it. Medieval society viewed leprosy with a mixture of horror and religious awe, seeing it as a living death and a divine punishment. Victims were cast out, forced to carry a bell or clapper to warn others of their approach, and severed from all human contact. But within the walls of their lazar houses, these knights found a perverse freedom. Their disease made them a secret society by default, isolated from the healthy population but bound together by a common fate and a fierce sense of purpose. What use could an army have for soldiers who were slowly dying? The answer lies in the brutal logic of holy war. A man who knows he is going to die and who is already shunned by the world has nothing left to fear. This made the Knights of St. Lazarus terrifyingly effective on the battlefield. They were often placed in the vanguard, the first to charge into enemy lines. The sight of these knights, their faces and hands often visibly disfigured by the disease, riding into combat with utter disregard for their own safety, struck a unique kind of psychological terror into their foes. To face a knight who could not be intimidated by the prospect of death was to face a force of nature. Their very existence became a powerful symbol of martyrdom, a living reminder of sacrifice that inspired both pity and awe in their fellow crusaders. They were the ultimate secret weapon, their power drawn not from secrecy of knowledge, but from the absolute transparency of their fate. How does an army harness the power of those it has already cast out? High in the remote mountains of Persia and Syria, a different kind of order perfected the art of fear. To the Crusaders who encountered them, they were the Assassins, a name whispered with a mixture of dread and fascination. Their true identity was the Nizari Ismailis, a sect within Shia Islam that had broken away from the mainstream caliphate, pursuing a radical and secretive interpretation of their faith. They were not an army but a state of mind, a phantom enemy whose power was measured not in battlefield victories but in the chilling precision of their strikes. The legends that swirled around them, spread by their terrified enemies, claimed they were drug-crazed fanatics, given hashish to experience the pleasures of paradise before being sent on suicide missions. This is where the word assassin itself comes from, a corruption of hashashin, meaning users of hashish. But the reality was far more calculated and psychologically complex. Their grand strategy was one of targeted political murder. They understood that to change the course of history, you did not always need to defeat a vast army. Sometimes you only needed to remove one key person. A charismatic general, a zealous governor, or even a mighty sultan could be brought down not by a sword in open combat, but by a dagger in the shadows. Their operatives were not mindless dupes, but highly trained and deeply indoctrinated agents known as fidais. These young men were initiated into the order's esoteric beliefs, which centered on the absolute spiritual and political authority of their leader, the imam, whom they believed to be an infallible guide sent by God. This devotion was their true drug, a faith so potent it made them willing to sacrifice their lives without the need for any earthly intoxicant. Their training was meticulous. A fid, I would spend years learning languages, customs, and the layout of enemy courts. He would infiltrate a city, sometimes posing as a merchant or a servant, waiting for months or even years for the perfect moment to strike. The assassinations were almost always public, carried out in broad daylight in a mosque or a marketplace. This was not a stealthy murder meant to look like an accident. It was a terrifying performance. The fid, I made no attempt to escape. He would stand over his victim, his bloody dagger held high, and await his own capture and certain gruesome execution. This was the core of their psychological warfare. The message was not just that you could be killed, but that you could be killed at any time in the safest place imaginable by a man who considered his own death a victory. How did a handful of men in remote mountain castles command such influence over the most powerful empires of their age? Their power base was a network of nearly impregnable fortresses, known as the Eagle's Nests, perched on towering peaks across Persia and Syria. These were not just military strongholds, they were self-sufficient communities, centers of learning, and sanctuaries for their unique beliefs. A castle like Alamut, the Order's headquarters in Persia, was a city in the sky, accessible only by a single, treacherous path that could be defended by a handful of men. From these mountain citadels, the Imam directed his fidais across the Islamic world, targeting Seljuk sultans and Crusader kings with equal impartiality. Their true secret was not the dagger, but the intelligence network that guided its aim. They were masters of information, using spies and sympathizers to learn the routines, weaknesses, and political rivalries of their targets long before a fidai was ever dispatched. They wielded the threat of death as a diplomatic tool, sometimes sending a warning instead of an assassin, a dagger left on a pillow or a cryptic message delivered in the night to force a powerful enemy to change his policies. They proved that the most powerful weapon is often not the one that kills, but the one that makes an entire empire feel it is living on the edge of a blade. What does the true story of the assassins reveal about the nature of power itself? Alamut was not merely a castle but a statement carved into the face of a mountain. Its name, meaning Eagle's Nest, was a perfect description of its terrifying inaccessibility. Perched on a razor-backed rock in the remote Alborz Mountains, the fortress was a masterpiece of defensive design. A single, narrow path, easily blocked by a handful of defenders, wound its way up the cliffside. To assault it was a logistical nightmare, a suicide mission against an enemy who could rain down arrows and stones from an unassailable height. Inside its walls, however, was more than just a garrison. Alamut was a self-sufficient world with vast granaries to withstand years of siege, sophisticated water systems, and libraries filled with philosophical and scientific texts. This was the brain of the Assassin Order, a place where strategy and faith were forged into a single, terrifying weapon. The true power of Alamut, however, lay not in its physical defenses, but in the psychological doctrine cultivated within. The legends of drug-induced paradise were a convenient fiction spread by their enemies to explain the unexplainable, the absolute loyalty of the fidais. The reality was far more sophisticated. The Order's leader, Hassan I Sabah, was a master of manipulation who understood the human psyche better than any general. He crafted an environment of total devotion, presenting himself as the infallible imam, the sole interpreter of divine truth. New recruits were brought into the fortress and subjected to a gradual, powerful indoctrination. They were not given a drug, but something far more potent, a sense of ultimate purpose and belonging. The secret doctrine taught that obedience to the imam was the highest form of piety, a direct path to spiritual salvation. The physical world was an illusion, and death in service to the cause was not an end, but a glorious transition. This belief system transformed a young man into a fidai, an agent who saw his own life as a currency to be spent for a divine objective. How did this doctrine translate into action? A fidai's training was meticulous and patient. He would learn languages, local customs, and the intricate politics of his target's court. He might spend years living undercover, building a mundane life as a merchant or a servant, all while waiting for the single, perfect moment to strike. The assassination itself was a public spectacle, a piece of psychological theater designed to paralyze an empire with fear. The fidai made no attempt to flee. His mission was to deliver the message, then become a martyr, his public execution serving as the final, chilling proof of his order's unwavering resolve. This was the ultimate secret of the assassins. Their power did not come from an army, but from the brilliant, terrifying fusion of an impregnable sanctuary and an unshakable idea that could turn a man into a living weapon. While kings and generals issued public declarations, the real business of statecraft unfolded in quiet courtyards and candlelit chambers, conducted by a hidden class of translators, spies, and envoys. These unofficial agents moved freely between the Crusader castles and Muslim courts, their influence often eclipsing that of entire armies. They were the shadow diplomats, the human bridges across a chasm of faith and language. A single skilled interpreter was more valuable than a company of knights, for he could prevent a misunderstanding from escalating into a massacre. He did not just translate words, he navigated the treacherous waters of cultural nuance, knowing when a formal Arabic greeting was required or how to frame a Frankish demand as a respectful request. These go-betweens were masters of a delicate art, shaping perceptions and building fragile trust where none seemed possible. They carried secret offers of truce, proposed prisoner exchanges, and delicately probed for weaknesses in alliances. One of the most remarkable figures was a man known as the Dragoman. This was not a name but a title meaning interpreter. He was often a native Christian or a convert, a man who understood both worlds intimately. He would stand at the shoulder of a Crusader baron during negotiations with a Seljuk emir, whispering not just the meaning of the words, but the intent behind them, the subtle insults to avoid, the gifts that would be seen as respectful. His counsel could mean the difference between a lasting peace and a devastating war. But beneath this layer of official translators operated a world of pure espionage. Spies were the true invisible currency of the Holy Land. They were not professional agents in the modern sense, but merchants, pilgrims, even disgruntled soldiers willing to trade secrets for silver. A Syrian glass merchant traveling between Damascus and Acre could report on troop movements he witnessed. An Italian sailor drinking in a tire tavern might overhear the grumblings of a garrison and sell that information to a Muslim agent. This constant, low-grade flow of intelligence created a shadow war of information, where knowing your enemy's next move was more valuable than 1,000 lances. How did a secret whispered in a Damascus souk find its way to a Crusader commander in Jerusalem? It traveled along these human chains, passed from a merchant to a translator, from a translator to a trusted envoy, and finally into the ear of power. These shadowy intermediaries were the true architects of the fragile peace that occasionally settled over the land, proving that a carefully chosen word in a secret meeting could achieve what 10,000 swords could not. While kings and knights dreamed of heavenly glory, the merchants of Venice and Genoa kept their eyes fixed on a far more earthly prize. These were not kingdoms but corporations, maritime republics whose power was measured not in acres of land, but in the weight of silver coins and the tonnage of their ships. For them, the Crusades were not a holy war, but the greatest business opportunity in 1,000 years. They saw the massive movement of men and material as a chance to open new markets, eliminate trade rivals, and weave a web of commercial influence that would outlast every Crusader kingdom. Their galleys did not just carry soldiers and pilgrims, they were floating warehouses of ambition, and their true weapons were contracts, cartography, and clandestine agreements. The most infamous example of this mercantile pragmatism was the shocking diversion of the Fourth Crusade. Originally intended to strike at Egypt, the heart of Muslim power, the entire expedition was hijacked by Venetian interests. The Venetians, under their aged and blind Doge Enrico Dandolo, had built the fleet for the Crusaders, but the price was staggeringly high. When the knights could not pay the full amount, Dandolo offered a chilling alternative. The Crusader army would not sail for Egypt. Instead, it would pay its debt by helping Venice reclaim a rival Christian port on the Adriatic Sea, the city of Zara. The Pope excommunicated the entire army for this act of aggression against a Christian city, but the Venetians were unmoved. Their commercial logic was absolute. Then came an even more audacious proposal. a Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, promised the Crusaders and the Venetians immense wealth and military support if they would help him reclaim the throne in Constantinople. For the Knights, it was a chance to refill their empty war chests. For the Venetians, it was a strategic masterstroke. In 1204, the Crusader army, directed by Venetian pilots, breached the legendary walls of Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world. They spent 3 days sacking it, looting its treasures, and desecrating its churches. The Venetians did not just take gold and relics, they systematically dismantled the Byzantine trade empire. They seized key ports, established their own trading quarters, and secured preferential tariffs that would give them a monopoly over the most lucrative routes in the eastern Mediterranean. They had used a crusade to cripple their greatest economic rival, proving that for merchant princes, faith was a currency to be spent, not a creed to be followed. How does a republic of merchants build a secret empire under the cover of a holy war? The answer lies in their colonies, which were not settlements of farmers but fortified counting houses. In ports like Acre, Tyre, and Alexandria, the Venetians and Genoese established autonomous districts known as fondocos. These were walled compounds containing warehouses, offices, churches, and residences for their citizens, governed by their own laws and protected by their own militias. A fondoco was a sovereign commercial intelligence hub. The merchants within it were not just traders, they were full-time spies. They meticulously recorded the prices of spices and silks, noted the arrival and departure of rival ships, and cultivated relationships with local Mamluk officials and Arab suppliers. This constant flow of economic data was their lifeblood, allowing them to manipulate markets and anticipate political shifts long before any king received a formal dispatch. Their networks of agents and informants formed an economic intelligence web far more extensive and sophisticated than any single knightly order's chain of command. A Templar preceptor held a castle, but a Venetian consul in Alexandria held the keys to the trade of the entire Indian Ocean. The rivalry between Venice and Genoa itself became a secret war fought across the Levant. They would bribe local emirs to grant them exclusive trade deals, sabotage each other's cargoes, and even engage in outright naval battles disguised as misunderstandings. Their true legacy was not the castles they built, but the invisible architecture of global commerce they pioneered, a system where information was the ultimate commodity and loyalty was a calculation of profit. In the silent ledgers of these merchant princes, we find the sobering truth that while the cross and the crescent clashed on the battlefield, the scales of trade were quietly, decisively tilting the balance of world power. The Templars' financial and military might was visible for all to see, but whispers always swirled about a deeper source of their power, a secret rooted in the very ground beneath their feet. For nearly a decade, their headquarters was not a castle, but the stables beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a site they believed was the ruins of King Solomon's temple. What exactly were 9 knights doing, living in such a confined and seemingly mundane space for so long? The official story was protecting pilgrims, but the sheer length of their stay and their limited numbers fueled a far more intriguing theory. They were not just guarding the site, they were excavating it. Rumors persisted that they had dug deep beneath the Temple Mount, tunneling into ancient chambers sealed for centuries. The legends claim they found something, not just gold or jewels, but objects of immense spiritual and historical significance. Some stories speak of the Holy Grail, the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, an artifact said to hold divine power. Others whisper of fragments of the true cross or even the long-lost Ark of the Covenant. This was not treasure in the conventional sense, it was esoteric capital. Possessing such a relic would grant the order unimaginable authority, transforming them from mere soldiers into the chosen guardians of Christianity's most sacred secrets. This supposed discovery would explain their meteoric rise from pauper knights to the Pope's personal bankers. How else could they have achieved such influence so quickly unless they held a leverage that was not merely financial but spiritual? Their sudden wealth and favor could be interpreted as a form of spiritual ransom, a reward for their silence or a share in the power their secret knowledge bestowed. This narrative of hidden wisdom became the double-edged sword of their legacy. The very rumors that explained their power also justified their destruction. When King Philip IV of France moved against them, the charges of heresy and secret rituals were politically motivated, but they found fertile ground in the public imagination precisely because of these long-standing whispers. The idea that the Templars worshipped a mysterious head called Baphomet, for instance, could be a distorted echo of a preserved relic or an ancient artifact they had discovered. Their secret initiation rites, where they were said to have denied Christ, might have been a misunderstood symbolic reenactment of their underground quest. Their true crime, in the eyes of the king and the pope, may not have been heresy but independence. A order that possessed the ultimate Christian relic would no longer need the church for its spiritual legitimacy. They would answer to a higher authority, one they had literally unearthed themselves. This made them untouchable and therefore unbearably dangerous. The treasure King Philip so desperately sought in their Paris temple may not have been just gold, but a secret that could shatter the very foundation of medieval faith. Did the Templars' quest for relics ultimately lead them to a knowledge too powerful for their world to contain? The shadow war for the soul of Christendom was not confined to the deserts of the Holy Land. While knights fought for Jerusalem in the east, a different kind of crusade erupted within the very heart of Europe, targeting not Muslims but fellow Christians. In the sun-drenched region of Languedoc in southern France, a secret church had taken root, flourishing in the tolerant culture of the local nobility. Its followers were known as the Cathars, and their beliefs presented a fundamental challenge to the power of Rome. The Cathars were dualists, seeing the world as a battleground between two eternal forces, a good spiritual god and an evil material one. They believed the physical world itself, including the human body, was a corrupt creation of the evil god, a prison for the divine spirit. This core belief led them to reject the entire material hierarchy of the Catholic Church, its elaborate sacraments, its wealth, and its very authority. They saw the cross not as a symbol of salvation, but as an instrument of torture created from the evil matter of the world. Their secret church was led by the perfecti, men and women who had undergone a spiritual initiation called the consolamentum. These perfecti lived lives of extreme poverty and asceticism, traveling in pairs and preaching their message in town squares and secluded castles. They were the guardians of a hidden knowledge, a path to liberation from the cycle of reincarnation and the prison of the material world. How did a peaceful, secretive movement become the target of the only crusade ever formally declared against Christians? The answer lies in the sheer threat they posed. The Cathar Church was not a small cult. It was a parallel society with its own clergy, its own rituals, and the protection of powerful lords. Its success revealed the deep spiritual dissatisfaction many felt with the often corrupt and worldly Catholic establishment. Pope Innocent III saw this not as a difference of opinion, but as a cancer that had to be cut out before it infected all of Europe. When his papal legate was murdered under suspicious circumstances in 1208, he had the pretext he needed. He declared the Albigensian Crusade, offering the same spiritual rewards for fighting heretics in France as for fighting Muslims in Palestine. An army of northern barons, hungry for land and salvation, descended upon the south. The war was brutal and total. At the siege of the city of Béziers, when the Crusaders asked how to distinguish Catholic from Cathar, the papal legate famously declared, "Kill them all." God will know his own. The city was razed and its population massacred, a chilling message of terror meant to break the will of the region. To aid in this holy inquisition, the Church called upon the very military orders born in the East. The Dominican order, founded specifically to preach against heresy, became the intellectual and spiritual hunters of the Cathars, using debate and doctrine to dismantle their beliefs. More strikingly, the Knights Templar, while not directly leading the crusade, found their resources and infrastructure co-opted by the papal forces. Their preceptories in the region became way stations and supplied depots for the crusading army, their financial network used to funnel money for a war against a secret they were not part of, but were compelled by papal decree to indirectly support. The final Cathar stronghold, the remote mountain fortress of Montségur, fell in 1244 after a long and grueling siege. Over 200 perfecti who refused to renounce their faith were burned alive in a massive pyre at the base of the mountain. The crusade eradicated the public face of Catharism, but its secret heart persisted for decades in hidden valleys and cellars, a testament to the enduring power of a belief that dared to see the world differently. The Albigensian Crusade proved that the machinery of holy war, once perfected abroad, could be turned inward with terrifying efficiency, silencing a whispered truth with fire and steel. The hunt for hidden beliefs required a new kind of knight, one who wielded a quill instead of a sword. In response to the persistent threat of heresy, the Pope created an institution that would become the ultimate secret order for enforcing orthodoxy, the Papal Inquisition. Its mission was not to conquer land, but to conquer souls, and its methods were a dark mirror of the very clandestine societies it sought to destroy. Unlike a public trial, the Inquisition operated with a chilling secrecy. Its procedures were conducted behind closed doors, its network of informants was shrouded in anonymity, and the accused often did not even know the identity of their accusers. This created a society paralyzed by suspicion, where a whispered rumor from a jealous neighbor or a disgruntled business rival could be enough to bring a person before the inquisitor's bench. The power of this system lay in its terrifying efficiency. The Inquisition developed a sophisticated bureaucracy to manage its operations, keeping meticulous records of testimonies, suspicions, and confessions. This archive of fear became its institutional memory, allowing it to track heresy across generations. Its agents were typically drawn from the Dominican and Franciscan orders, men trained in theology and logic, skilled at dissecting arguments and trapping the accused in their own words. They were the Church's intellectual secret police, operating with a papal mandate that granted them authority across national borders, often putting them in direct conflict with local kings and bishops who prized their own judicial power. How did this secret court alter the balance of power in medieval Europe? The Inquisition fundamentally shifted authority from the local to the central, from the state to the church. A monarch might control the army, but the Pope now controlled a far more pervasive instrument, the power to define truth and to declare any citizen an enemy of God. This gave the Church a lever of influence it had never possessed before, allowing it to intervene directly in the affairs of any kingdom under the guise of spiritual purity. For other secret societies, the Inquisition posed an existential threat. The Cathar perfecti were its first major target, but any group operating in the shadows, from esoteric mystical circles to even the powerful Templars, now had to contend with an organization whose entire purpose was to uncover and dismantle secrets. The Inquisition did not just punish belief, it sought to map the entire landscape of the human soul, turning faith itself into a territory to be policed. Its legacy was a world where the most dangerous secrets were not those of treasure or assassins, but the private thoughts held in the silence of one's own mind. The trap was sprung in the cold dawn of Friday, October 13, 1307. With a single secret order, King Philip IV of France unleashed his royal officials across the entire kingdom. Before the sun had fully risen, thousands of Templar brothers, from the lowliest sergeants to the highest-ranking officials, were dragged from their beds and thrown into dungeons. It was a masterstroke of coordinated betrayal, a conspiracy executed with chilling precision. The charges read aloud to them were designed to shock the conscience of all Christendom, heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable acts of idol worship. The king claimed he was acting as God's agent, cleansing the faith of a hidden corruption. But his true motive was far more earthly and desperate. Philip was bankrupt, his treasury emptied by years of war, and he owed the Templars a fortune. Destroying his creditors was the simplest way to cancel his debt and seize their legendary wealth for himself. The confessions he needed were extracted in the darkness of the torture chamber. Templar knights, men who had faced Saracen armies without flinching, were subjected to the rack and the strappado, their bodies stretched and broken until they admitted to whatever their interrogators demanded. They confessed to spitting on the cross, to denying Christ, to worshipping a mysterious bearded head known as Baphomet. These confessions, torn from them in agony, were then used to justify the entire operation to the Pope and the public. The King's Gambit was a terrifying demonstration of how a state could weaponize secrecy itself, turning the Templars' own private rituals into proof of demonic conspiracy. How many of these whispered secrets were real, and how many were simply the inventions of a king who needed a monster to slay? The testimonies that emerged from the Templar dungeons were a chaotic tapestry of truth and terror. Under brutal torture, some brothers confessed to grotesque rituals, while others, even when the pain became unbearable, steadfastly maintained their innocence. The most common confession involved the denial of Christ and the desecration of the cross during their secret initiation ceremonies. But the most tantalizing and bizarre claim was the worship of an idol called Baphomet, described as a bearded male head, sometimes gilded and possessing great power. Was this a genuine artifact the Order had discovered beneath the Temple Mount, a misunderstood relic, or a complete fiction invented by the king's inquisitors to paint the knights as devil worshippers? The evidence was and remains utterly contradictory, a hall of mirrors designed to confuse and condemn. The entire judicial process was a masterpiece of political theater, where the desired outcome was predetermined and the testimony was merely a prop. Pope Clement V, initially hesitant, was eventually pressured by King Philip to suppress the order, not necessarily because he believed the charges, but because the Templars' independence had become a liability for the entire church structure. The final act of this tragedy belonged to the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. Imprisoned for 7 years, he initially confessed, perhaps to end his suffering. But when he was brought before a public tribunal to hear his life sentence, something remarkable happened. The old man found a final reservoir of strength. He publicly recanted his confession, declaring himself and his order innocent of all charges. He stated that the only sin was lying to save his own life. For this act of defiance, King Philip had him burned at the stake that very day on a small island in the River Seine. From the flames, de Molay is said to have issued a curse, summoning both the Pope and the King to meet him before God within a year. In a chilling twist of fate, Pope Clement V died just 1 month later, and King Philip IV followed him to the grave before the year was out. This dramatic end did not close the book on the Templars, it opened 1,000 new ones. Their official dissolution only fueled the legends of their survival. If their vast treasure was never found, and if their fleet had vanished, then surely the order itself must have escaped. Stories spread that those ships carried not only gold but also the surviving leadership, who sought refuge in Scotland, a kingdom hostile to the Pope and therefore safe from his reach. There, they allegedly fought alongside Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn, their military expertise turning the tide. This narrative of a hidden lineage, guarding ancient secrets through the centuries, became the fertile ground from which new myths would grow. The most enduring of these theories suggests that the Templars did not die out but simply went deeper underground, their symbols, rituals, and esoteric knowledge eventually resurfacing within the guilds of stonemasons. Over time, these operative lodges evolved into the speculative fraternity known as Freemasonry. The parallels are compelling, from architectural symbolism to a structure of secret degrees and initiations. Whether this connection is historical fact or a powerful foundational myth is a debate that continues to this day, but it proves one thing conclusively: the true power of a secret society often lies not in its documented actions, but in the endless whispers it leaves behind. The embers of the Templar pyres had barely cooled when new stories began to sprout from the ashes. A legacy built on whispers cannot be so easily extinguished, and the idea of a hidden lineage passing ancient knowledge through the centuries proved more resilient than any single order. This is where history blurs into legend, creating a bridge from the medieval world to our own. The most concrete line of descent belongs to the Hospitallers, who offer a masterclass in institutional survival. After their epic defense of Malta, the order continued its sovereign existence, even after Napoleon Bonaparte forced them from the island in 1798. They eventually re-established their headquarters in Rome, where they remain today as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. This is a recognized sovereign entity under international law, issuing its own passports and maintaining diplomatic relations with over 100 countries. Their mission has come full circle, focusing primarily on providing medical aid and humanitarian relief across the globe. Their 8-pointed cross is a symbol of continuous service, a direct, unbroken thread stretching back to that first hospice in Jerusalem. The Templars, however, left a ghostly inheritance, one built on speculation and yearning. The most persistent theory connects their vanished brothers to the stonemasons' guilds of Scotland and England. According to this narrative, Templar refugees, protected by King Robert the Bruce after Bannockburn, shared their architectural secrets and, more importantly, their tradition of secret rituals and symbolic knowledge with the local operative masons. When the great cathedral building era waned, these guilds began accepting non-masons or speculative members who were less interested in laying stone and more fascinated by the philosophical and esoteric teachings preserved within the lodge. This, the story goes, was the birth of modern Freemasonry. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. The use of architectural imagery, the system of graded initiations, and the emphasis on moral and spiritual building all echo the kind of secretive, structured brotherhood the Templars perfected. Yet historians often draw a firm line, pointing out there is no definitive paper trail, only a powerful myth that filled a vacuum. Why has this connection proven so enduring? It speaks to a deep human desire to believe that powerful secrets are not lost, only hidden, and that history is shaped by a continuous, enlightened few. This narrative fuels our modern pop culture, from the treasure hunts in films like National Treasure to the globe-spanning conspiracies in video games like Assassin's Creed. These stories are not history, but they are a history of their own, revealing our endless fascination with the idea that the true levers of power have always been pulled from the shadows. The real legacy of the Crusader orders may not be a hidden treasure or a bloodline, but the very blueprint for the secret society itself, a story we are still telling and still believing today. Stone and mortar became the permanent language of their secret power. While kingdoms rose and fell, the great castles and churches built by these orders stood as silent, indestructible testaments to their influence. Their architecture was not merely for defense or worship, it was a physical manifesto of their hidden knowledge and unshakable authority. The Knights Templar, for instance, did not build their churches in the shape of the traditional cross. Instead, they favored a mysterious round design, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Stepping into a Templar chapel, like the famous one in London, a visitor would find himself surrounded by a circular wall, with no single direction taking precedence. This was a profound theological statement, a physical representation of their unique role as guardians of a universal, global faith, unbound by the conventions of local bishops. The design also served a deeply practical purpose for a secretive brotherhood. The circular layout created perfect acoustics, ensuring that whispered conversations during private initiation rites would not echo or be overheard by outsiders. Every pillar and arch was placed with intention, creating hidden sightlines and secluded alcoves where secrets could be exchanged away from prying eyes. The Teutonic Knights, on the other hand, expressed their power through sheer, overwhelming mass. Their castles in the Baltic wilderness, like the colossal Marienburg, were not just fortresses but entire fortified cities made of brick. These structures were the administrative hearts of their theocratic state, containing everything from armories and treasuries to scriptoriums and grand halls for receiving diplomats. Their design was a masterclass in psychological dominance, projecting an image of unassailable order and permanence onto a chaotic landscape. The sheer scale of these complexes, visible for miles across the flat plains, sent a clear message to both conquered natives and rival kings. Our authority is built into the very earth itself, and we are here to stay. But the true allure for modern treasure hunters and historians lies in what might be concealed within these stones. Legends persist of hidden tunnels snaking beneath Templar preceptories, possibly used to move treasure or people in absolute secrecy. Some researchers point to strange, seemingly out-of-place symbols carved into the stonework of certain churches, arguing they are not mere stonemasons' marks but a coded language, a map to hidden knowledge or relics. A carving of a specific flower, a unique geometric pattern, or an anomalous star could be a signpost left by a master builder for those initiated enough to understand its meaning. Were these orders using their unparalleled resources and access to advanced architectural techniques to encode their greatest secrets into the one thing they knew would survive them, their own formidable buildings? The stones do not speak, but they continue to whisper, challenging us to decipher the final, silent testament of the world's most powerful secret societies. While the knightly brotherhoods dominate the history books, their entire enterprise would have collapsed without a hidden network of women working in the background. The same religious fervor that sent men to the Holy Land also inspired countless women to take vows and support the cause, but from a different angle. They could not wield a sword, but they wielded immense influence from within the cloister and the hospital ward. The most prominent of these were the Sisters of the Hospital of St. John. These women were not merely helpers, they were fully professed religious sisters integral to the Hospitaller mission. While the brothers fought on the front lines, the sisters managed the vast infirmaries in the order's rear echelons. Their medical knowledge was often superior, specializing in the long-term care of the chronically ill and wounded, tasks that required a patience and dedication that defined their contribution. They treated everything from battlefield injuries to the debilitating diseases that ravaged armies far more effectively than any blade. Beyond nursing, these religious houses for women became hubs of logistical genius. A convent associated with a military order was a center of production. Within its walls, sisters and lay associates would weave and repair the linen for bandages, prepare preserved foods for long campaigns, and craft the very garments that clothed the brother knights. This was the medieval equivalent of a military-industrial complex, quietly humming along under female management, but their most secret power was one of information. A convent was a crossroads. Pilgrims, merchants, and traveling nobles would all seek shelter within its walls, and the sisters, often highly literate, were perfectly positioned to listen. The gossip of a tired merchant, the boasts of a passing soldier, the fears of a displaced noble, all of this intelligence was collected, sifted, and discreetly passed along the order's communication channels. A whispered report from a sister in Acre about supply shortages could alter a caravan's route. A warning about local unrest from a convent in Antioch could save a patrol from an ambush. They were the unseen ears of the Crusader states, their piety making them above suspicion. How do you measure the power of a woman who never held a sword, but whose knowledge could save an entire company of those who did? From the silent guardians of the Holy Sepulchre to the invisible merchants of Venice, the Crusades spawned a breathtaking array of hidden powers. This was not a simple conflict of faith, but a crucible that forged secret societies of every conceivable kind. We witnessed the Templars who mastered the flow of money until they became the bankers to empires. We saw the Hospitallers who blended the art of healing with the science of war to outlast every kingdom. In the northern wilderness, the Teutonic Knights built a sovereign state from nothing, while high in the Syrian mountains, the assassins proved that a single, well-placed dagger could be more powerful than an army. Behind them all moved the shadow diplomats and merchant spies, the men and women who traded in information, the true currency of the shadows. Their collective legacy is a powerful reminder that history is not only written in the public proclamations of kings, but also in the whispered oaths taken in torch-lit crypts and the silent agreements made in bustling ports. The allure of their stories endures because they speak to a timeless human fascination with the idea of hidden knowledge and unseen influence. We are still captivated by the mystery of the Templars' lost fleet, the chilling efficiency of the assassins' fidei, and the unbroken chain of the Hospitallers' mission. These orders challenge us to look beyond the surface of history and wonder what other secrets lie buried just out of sight. Their world of codes, castles, and clandestine meetings continues to shape our books, our films, and our imagination. Now we turn the final page over to you. Of all these incredible orders, which one captures your imagination the most? Was it the financial genius of the Templars, the enduring resilience of the Hospitallers, or the psychological mastery of the assassins? Share your thoughts and join the conversation in the comments below.